So in this case, what are these intermediary rules? And the current rule also differentiates between intermediary and significant social media rules. So if you can tell us what the difference is between the two, if there is something there that can impact the users. Yeah.
India has close to 740 million active internet users. Now, subscribers. So the number of users may be less, the number of people may be less because one person may have 3 connections. This as per the monthly usage reports which are put out by the Telecom Regulatory Authority. That's one. Number, I'm bringing up these figures. Just hold on with me. It's important. Okay. Now, Facebook has about 300 million active users, something like that. There's no accurate count which is put out, but these are estimates. WhatsApp will have about 400 million. There'll be 600 million unique views on YouTube because a lot of people access YouTube from different devices. So I don't know if there is a registered user count which exists somewhere, Statista, etc., but very high counts. Okay, why this becomes important is now you look at the thresholds which distinguish as per a notification in the official gazette between the duties for social media intermediaries and significant social media intermediaries. And that's 5 million users. That's it. Okay. So 5 million users is something which would even impact platforms such as GitHub, Reddit. So Discord, right? Things like that. So that's why 740 million users, 5 million, these compliances apply to more than Facebook's, Twitter's, WhatsApp's of the world, as many people say this line. Okay, so that's what I want people to walk back from. And the second is that how will they be enforced? I think so. It's enforcement essentially by pick and choose. The government will not have the capacity of determining who's where, and the pick and choose will be on not only a basis of the size and the prominence, which is of course there, right? The size and the prominence is there for these 6 to 7 platforms which are on our tongues, but also for the others who come to their notice. Traceability is basically that the originator of a message needs to be identifiable with respect to any kind of instant messaging, even if there's end-to-end encryption, right? What it does is, firstly, it undermines the very principle of end-to-end encryption, because end-to-end encryption also in certain deployments means that people should have a level of anonymity, which is very important for activists, for especially for women sometimes who who are survivors, right? And also in several contexts, right? I don't want to get into it, but anonymity may be misused, yes, is abused, but there are a whole range of investigative techniques and tools which include starting out with good old-fashioned police work in which a person's phone can be seized, right? Rather than just tracing the originator of the message. And also, there is no non-falsifiable way, even if you imprint the identity of a person with the message, that that they are the originator of a message, because even if you put one comma or you capitalize or you put one space, it's counted as a new data entry. Okay. Right. So it may be the same message, it may be just being converted from platform to platform, which is what happens in viral message. So Professor Manoj Prabhakaran actually says that it's not even useful, and the mass surveillance fears are there, and they have been proven again and again. Because in China, we have a very popular smartphone messaging app called WeChat, right? And in WeChat, actually, certain words and images are blocked and filtered. And people are having full conversations, and certain words are being blocked instantly. They have block lists.
Which means
certain images are not going through.
Encryption on WeChat, right?
No, whatever is their deployment, right? Even if you have end-to-end encryption, but you're doing all of this, you're breaking and undermining it. The next regulation through executive notification can be this. Now, people maybe say, Apar, you're fear-mongering, right? But we have been more right about things than we have been wrong here at IFF. No, we go by a very median level of possibility and chance of how legal design and incentive contributes to certain kind of conduct by government as well as by the public, and that's what we understand very well. Now I'll just stop here, but I'll say that uh, the IT rules are much more. We should also look at the impact on culture and our diversity in thought, and how young filmmakers or people like us who enjoy and were finally getting that same taste of cinema which was in tune with our contemporary standards of what we wanted.
Absolutely.
For me as a millennial, for the people who may be Gen Z, uh, was being finally created. We were going beyond the stereotypical Saas Bahu to
Yeah.
the Bahu Saas, or not also those kind of situations, to a very modern conception of the Indian modern family.
Absolutely.
And those depictions by themselves cannot exist under the present rules. And
If we
I'll tell
talk
you
about,
more
yeah,
about it.
if we talk about representation, right? Finally, we were seeing a lot more diversity and representation in a lot of media that was being generated by OTT platforms. Something very interesting that Zoya Akhtar mentioned in one of her interviews was that if the censorship now seeps into OTT platforms, right? What will happen is that Indian developed shows now seek to lose any form of legitimacy and also credibility in comparison to the media that's coming out of from the rest of the world. So now Indian, because now there is the same level of censorship that is usually meted out to Bollywood movies. Now Indian TV shows cannot necessarily fare on the same platform as, let's say, a few Western shows would, right? So she said that there
Or
is a
K or K shows,
of
Yeah.
which is
so
what we compete with most often now.
yeah,
Because if you look at the K shows, they also have uh, uh, similar
themes.
Plot line.
a similar social dynamic where
Yeah.
there is a level of conservatism which sorry, I shouldn't bring this up, but yeah, but they have not gone about it with this kind of a legal sledgehammer, right?
Yeah.
That tension between the past, the present, and the future. They're negotiating that with cultural output rather than putting in clauses of in the code of ethics. For instance, I'll just read out what is a clause in the code of ethics. A publisher shall take into consideration India's, not the world. So we're not producing for the world any longer. Even
Yeah.
if we are, we can't show it in India, which becomes economically unviable. So a publisher shall take into consideration India's multiracial and multi-religious context and exercise due caution and discretion when featuring the activities, beliefs, practices, or views of any racial or religious group. So practically, given that each person's identity is linked to a racial or a religious group, you can't do pretty much anything
Yeah.
except possibly make very stale uh, dramas, comedy shows, or
Yeah.
something which is very, very conservative.
True. True. I mean, we saw this with the Tandav case, right? Where they said to be hurting the Hindu religion and was called Hindu phobic in so many senses. And I think one interesting example of this was also Padmavati, when they sort of like set a prize money for having Sanjay Leela Bansali or Deepika Padukone's life taken. But many historians then also reveal that Padmavati was actually just a fictional character, like she was just born out of a poem and wasn't even a real queen in some senses. So I think that, like, more than even depiction of reality, there's so much curtailment of just creativity and freedom to explore any avenue here.
See, and the culture can take place in any way, and we should be open to it. For instance, Jai Santoshima is more or less a creation of a Bollywood movie. People don't know it, and it's been explored. There are levels of censorship which already exist against OTT platforms, which are under the Indian Penal Code, which have provisions and are very stringent actually on hate speech.
Yeah.
It's the prosecution, which is another thing. and which is why organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Pen Canada have come out with very good reports on how to reform them. So yeah,
True.
by and large, see, here's the thing. Uh, there were already so many legal compliances. What has happened now is that the cable TV regulatory system, which is imperfect, always constitutionally suspect, has been ported towards online streaming platforms which have core distinctions
Hmm.
without any legal safeguards per se. And more or less, what you notice over a period of time is that when you port the same regulatory architecture, and press coverage is already showing that filmmakers are saying that we are not being commissioned for any political shows. It's off the table right now. OTT platforms have deferred some shows which were commissioned
I
earlier.
want to ask you
So,
this also about digital news media. Now, if you look at the coverage of COVID, right, a lot of us were
yeah,
getting the right information only from a lot of independent news outlets online, as opposed to what the television channels were doing and what the international national newspapers were doing. How does this impact digital news media? I mean, are we looking at pretty much being China at this point, where we absolutely have no idea what is happening on ground?
I would say, and we've always said this is a Chinese model because there is a degree of laws, regulations, notional fundamental rights even within their constitution. But the institutional framework of safeguards and the deeper legality is always suspect. And there is always high degrees of state control, which has never been the Indian model, or has been, but was to a certain degree then challenged by the internet and the diversity it provided.
Right.
So I would say that is the issue. Let's not only see it from a xenophobic lens,
Mm.
but it is somewhat similar to uh, a Chinese model in terms of the Chinese state wanting having a greater degree of control over the internet itself,
But also
and that's
controlling
what's
the narrative.
coming across
That's
very
what
clearly.
I asked you. I mean, what is the future of independent organizations like Wire and Scroll, and the degree of the control that the state now wants to exercise on the narrative, right? So, what do you think is the implication on that?
I think they are in for a incredibly tough time.
Um,
And I wouldn't only say them, but any digital news media portal which has some amount of significant reach. For instance, think about the specialty platforms such as feminism in India.
right.
It becomes tough for everyone, or
Yeah.
s- certain people go for these gadget news platforms. It becomes tough for them, right?
Yeah.
And the argument has been that there needs to be some regulation. Well, the regulation in place right now, and you can go and look at a longer analysis, is essentially that not only do you register, which is already started with the Ministry of Information Broadcasting, you give your details of what is your entity type, who are the designated people there, which self regulatory body are you part of, which is a requirement today, okay,
Right.
under the rules. But also now, on the basis of this performer information by with the ministry, number one, you're obligated to hear complaints by any person on the internet who doesn't like your content. Resolve it. If that person is dissatisfied, they escalate it to the self-regulatory body. If they are dissatisfied with that, they go to the Ministry of Information Broadcasting. The Ministry of Information Broadcasting at the same time can initiate a suo motu complaint by itself without even anybody complaining to it. And the Ministry of Information Broadcasting has broad censorial powers. It can ask you to change that article, the title, take it down. And if you don't agree, it can start a process for blocking of your website.
Right.
Now, this is what is there in those rules, and which is why I say these are drastic overreach. One only needs to read them to understand them. And if law students and lawyers on this call find it a bit tougher for themselves to engage with it, I would recommend a petition on live law. Uh, uh, on live law, by I mean not published on live law, but representing live law, private media, in the Kerala High Court, which is published on internetfreedom.in/legal. Just go have a look. It explains why it's a problem. And the Kerala High Court has been pleased to issue notice and also prevent any coercive action, thereby granting a limited stay against live law on these rules.
Right.
So there are definite problems with these rules, which emerge from delegated legislation, which impacts, if you're interested in wider constitutional design and institutional structure, parliamentary authority towards, and then towards the substantive areas of freedom of expression, assembly, receive information knowledge, cultural production, creativity, and privacy, because arguably it undermines end-to-end encryption as well as cybersecurity.
Apar, last question from you, which is IFF had mentioned this in an article which started with the internet is broken. I want to ask you, what is the ideal landscape of social media for you? What do you think ideally should be happening? Where should we be right now? We be right now.
So, social media will never be the place of milk and honey. That's the first thing which people need to remember. Two, what can we hope for is that it can be a better, more democratic space. What do you notice when you think about democracy? You should not think about a place where people agree with you, but where you can have a possible disagreement and go back. And even if you feel like killing the other person, you don't get to say that. Okay. And I'm saying you don't get to say it because most of the times we think about the other person threatening you, right? So it needs to be less hostile, more civil, but at the same point in time, it needs to move towards that direction. It needs to be more equal. It needs to be more equitable. So most of the people who are hearing this are lawyers, right? So look at the preamble. The internet should be a reflection of our constitutional values, and we have a pretty good set of values, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of civic discourse as aspiration. So it should be aspirational and then should have these constitutional values, and that's what we work at the Internet Freedom Foundation towards achieving. Not perfection, but we drive that towards our work. That's a different conversation as well. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to both of you. And I invite people to engage with our work across social media, register on our forum as well, where all of our staff is present, including me. It's on forum.internetfreedom.in. And I look forward to hearing further feedback. I would encourage both of you to also post a link to this podcast there, and maybe members from our community may find it valuable.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Apar.